Well, good morning, everyone. We've got a pretty full room here, which is fantastic news. I think we, over the next hour and a half or so, are going to enlighten you with a whole bunch of really exciting information and data and statistics and insights as to what's happening on the ground in Indian country across the United States. I wanted to welcome you to the New America Foundation. New America is a think tank. We cover a variety of different issues, everything from healthcare policy, and as you can imagine, people are a little busy on that right now, to foreign policy analysis. And I run the Open Technology Initiative here at New America, which is kind of the technological telecom arm of the work that the foundation does. So welcome, and thank you for coming out this morning to be here. For the past decade or so, I've actually been an avid community broadband advocate and working with myriad groups all around the globe on building and deploying innovative technologies. And what's interesting is about half a decade ago now, I met a guy named Matt Rantanen from a project called Tribal Digital Village, and we immediately hit it off. And I hold him personally responsible, in fact, for both opening my eyes to the remarkable disadvantages that Native American communities face all across the United States. But also, I hold him responsible for showing me firsthand just this incredible power to address these shortcomings that local tribes have, and the power that they wield really to self-provision their own telecommunications infrastructures. And this is a power that's really not been tapped. And I think this is something that we'll talk about, and Jeffrey hopefully will nail on the head a couple of times, as to, this is really an incredible resource that we haven't yet taken full advantage of in the United States. And just last year, I met Valerie Fasthorse, who works at the Coeur d'Alene tribe. And for me, at least, I was incredibly stunned to learn about what she was doing, not because of the sophistication or the success of her network, but rather that I, and no one that I knew here in Washington, D.C., had ever heard of the Coeur d'Alene tribe's work. And they've built this enormous network. When people talk about how municipal wireless didn't work in the United States, Valerie Fasthorse is sitting there like, what's up? Because they have this huge network serving a populace that no one else deemed worthy to serve, and has been fully operational for years now. So both Tribal Digital Village and the Coeur d'Alene tribe are both two of the case studies that are covered in this report. And I highlight them because I have my own personal experiences with the people that have really built and sustained those systems. And today I feel very honored to have the opportunity to work with an amazing team of individuals who have not only documented these and other success stories, but have systematically collected and analyzed data that confounds the stereotypes that have been out there for far too long. And when I think about what's actually happening with new media, technology, and internet use in Indian country, this report and the process of collecting information and writing this report was eye-opening for me, and I expect that it will be for you as well. So finally, in the tradition of November Thanksgiving festivities, I'm very thankful also for the new thought leadership that we have and that has been brought to the fore by this current administration. And we have two speakers here, Blair Levin and Danny Weitzer, who I view as two of the key minds behind what's going to become the new broadband policies and strategies for the United States. And I'm honored to have you both here with us today. They've made it a priority to be here and to cram us into an overflowingly busy schedule and to talk about the importance of this work and their own efforts to ensure that the needs of these communities, of Native Americans across the United States and throughout Indian country, are met. So I'd like to welcome Blair first, followed by Danny, to get us started on today's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I hate to start the talk by actually disagreeing with someone, particularly someone who's given me a kind introduction, but I have to quibble with the thought that I'm one of the minds behind the broadband plan. Danny, actually, who's very eminent and very famous in this, is contributing an enormous amount intellectually to this. But I want to be clear that it's an interesting thing about the process that I'm more or less in charge of. in the first speech I ever gave on the broadband plan, which was in July, I deeply criticized the record to date of all the filings because the record actually was very, very bad. And it was very clear that people filing things, most of them, not all, weren't taking that process seriously. Since then, we have been the beneficiary of a lot of better filings. And in this regard, I want to say that we are really much more in the position of editors than we are real analysts and really coming up with the ideas. In fact, the plan will be an American plan. It won't be an FCC plan. It'll be an American plan. And it is designed to deal with the problems that Congress asked us to deal with, which I'll talk about in a second. But this is all by way of saying Sasha is actually probably far more important intellectually to the plan than I am, because he's done some terrific filings. New America has filed some very good information, and that's the only way the plan will be successful. And I say that in the spirit of today's document, which I had the pleasure of having an advanced copy of. But this is the kind of thing that we really need in order to have a successful plan, because we have too limited time, too limited resources to really come up with the best ideas ourselves. Our job really is to make sure that there's a process in which everybody can contribute the best ideas, and then the job of those of us fortunate enough to be working on this is to really kind of try to pull it together in a piece that works in harmony. And so, Sasha, thank you for the introduction, but more importantly, thank you for what you've written here. Thank you for your other filings on spectrum and other related issues. I'm very grateful to that. I want to thank Lois for helping organize this and allowing me to speak with you today. And thank you for the excellent work that you've been doing to connect tribal communities. One more, Jeffrey. Really appreciate your meeting with our staff. Like I said, we have more of an editorial function, I think, than people understand. Jeffrey has spent literally hours over at the commission in the last week, meeting with relevant people on the broadband team, enormously useful, and he is not done yet in terms of the amount of time that he's going to spend over. And also want to, again, it's delighted to share the podium with my friend Danny, who I had the great pleasure of working with, who I've known for years, and we worked together on the transition, and it was a lot of fun, and look forward to his remarks as well. Let me just say a few things about what we're doing and how it relates to what's happening here today. In the Recovery Act, Congress and the President charged the FCC with creating a National Broadband Plan to ensure reliable high-speed access for all people in the United States. Congress recognized what I trust is clear to everyone in this room, that high-speed internet is the critical communications tool of the 21st century, and indeed is probably the platform for the economy in the 21st century. As such, the cost of being disconnected is large and growing. We often talk about some of the tangible costs, the inability of someone who's not online, who's unemployed, to find and apply for jobs, students who aren't online, their inability to access information that 70% of the students are using to write their high school papers and study, or the access of right now, most Americans use broadband to get information about healthcare, and it improves their own ability to control how they get their healthcare. It's very difficult to be a productive member of a society without the fundamental tools that most people use to be more productive. And these tangible economic costs are real to our economy and our society. But it's also important to look at the intangible social costs. Ultimately, those without connectivity are disenfranchised. They're unable to interact fully with their own communities. Without connectivity, it is difficult to be an engaged, informed citizen of any nation that you're a part of or any community. So this is a challenge which looms especially large for tribal communities, and unfortunately this struggle is not new. Telephone penetration is at less than 70% in Indian country. There's actually very little reliable data on broadband penetration, but I've seen some estimates suggesting it's as low as 5%. And there's only sporadic deployment of cellular service. And this is, it's somewhat of a tragedy, I think, that as I started to look at this, thanks to the efforts of Jeffrey and Lois and Sasha to bring it to the attention of the broadband team, things hadn't really changed from my last time at the FCC. I was there in the early 90s. And one would hope that there would have been some progress, but there actually has been very little. So yesterday I had the pleasure of spending time with Jeffrey, and last night I was able to read both an advanced copy as well as some filings about broadband for tribal nations, and two things really stood out. One is there really is there are different economics in Indian country that make deployment of broadband particularly challenging. Infrastructure availability is one of those. Now, communications networks are not a single thing. They're a combination of things. And it's sometimes very difficult to get all the pieces to come together in Indian country, partly because of low population density and the rural nature of Indian country. Businesses often find it difficult to create an economic case to bring the service to Indian country, since the fundamental economics of the networks are all about density. Or actually, I should say linear density is one of the things I've learned while doing this. To make matters more complicated, the deployment challenge of each tribe looks different. There are unique terrain challenges, geopolitical challenges, and business environment challenges. And there's a different existing infrastructure. Sometimes there is a telephone system, sometimes there's cellular. Then sometimes there's even limited broadband. As such, the most efficient technology for bringing broadband to each tribe will likely vary by tribe, so that it could mean that for some there is a fiber solution. For others, it has to be a wireless solution. For others, satellite is the only thing that will make sense. One size does not and cannot fit all. Second, we must approach tribal connectivity on the tribal level. We need significant government-to-government interaction so that federal agencies understand the unique challenges to the particular tribal community. Now, this month, the President challenged all federal agencies to engage on a meaningful level with tribal officials. And the plan that we're drafting and the future of broadband should follow both the spirit and the letter of that order. You all understand best the unique needs and circumstances of tribal communities, so we need your expertise in making the best policy. We're grateful for the time and effort you've already given to us, and I hope today jumpstarts further that engagement to help us craft the best plan for tribal connectivity within the broader plan. We only have 90 days left, literally 90 days from today. We're supposed to deliver this plan. So we need to work very intensively and very efficiently. Now, I think we recognize, and the Commission generally recognizes, there's also it's important to connect community institutions in Indian country. That is, there are important uses for connectivity in healthcare, law enforcement, and education facilities. And indeed, this is specifically recognized in the legislation, which is broader in scope in terms of the challenge that it gives the FCC than any piece of legislation, including the 96 Telecom Act. It asks the FCC to look at broadband and how it can best be used for 12 different specific national purposes, education, energy, healthcare among them, some of them are not traditionally within the scope of the FCC. But I think it recognizes how broadband is that general purpose technology that can be important for all sectors. It's also the importance of connectivity in institutions is recognized in a bill that Senator Udall just introduced on rural telemedicine. These institutions can also support labor and job training programs. This kind of public infrastructure, that is to say, once you connect one institution like a healthcare facility, you can then build off of that to do the job training, to do the education, to do the business development. But it has to be central to our plan for tribal regions, but again, it has to be unique because the market structure in these communities is often different than in other areas. There are different competitive dynamics. Therefore, as telecom deployment history has proven, a solution that works in some places may not work in Indian country, or that works in one area in Indian country may not work in others. So we have to stimulate the creation of that infrastructure in many different ways. And particularly as we are writing a national plan, one of the challenges we face, not just on this issue, but on many issues, is the one size doesn't fit all. It does not, for example, the adoption problem. It's not one problem. Yes, there is a large group of people who do not adopt because of low income, but there are also other reasons why people don't, and it's important as we develop our policies on tribal lands and on everything else that we understand the different customer segments, the different kinds of technologies, the different kinds of availability. We have to look far more granular, and that's a real challenge in developing a national plan, but it's one we look forward to meeting. So with that, again, let me express my appreciation for today's study and all your filings. Thank you for being proactive and working with our team to determine the best policy solutions. We look forward to working with the tribal leadership. As I said, this is the beginning of an ongoing engagement leading up to our February plan, but beyond that too. Between the FCC and such groups as the Native Public Media and the National Congress of American Indians. Unfortunately, with only 90 days left, I actually have to get back to the office where I've been since about 6:30 this morning. But my colleague, Thomas Wyatt, there he is here. He's taking notes and he'll be reporting back to myself and the team. Moreover, I fully expect that Jeff and others will be back at the FCC and helping make sure that the plan has a thoughtful, action-oriented section on bringing a brighter broadband future to tribal lands. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sasha. And thanks very much, Blair. Blair is really unduly modest in his role as, quote, just being the editor. I think that what Blair has really done is, in some sense, what your report captures. What Blair's done is to understand how to capture the collaborative spirit of the Internet to really develop a broadband plan that has the necessary input that we need. And since I believe you generally end up where you start, I think that we're in for a great treat, and owe Blair a tremendous debt of thanks. On behalf of Commerce Secretary Gary Locke and NTI Administrator Larry Strickling, I want to congratulate you on this very important report. I understand it's just the first phase of the Native Public Media's project examining broadband use, and we look forward to many more. To paraphrase Blair, who often counts off the days, I understand there are only 11 days left in Native American History Month, so your report has come just in time, a little bit early. That'll perhaps inspire Blair to meet his deadline, which I know he will. I think their report is so striking in that it reflects the participation of demographically diverse respondents from more than 120 tribes in 28 states. The report provides much needed data about both the challenges and the opportunities for broadband in Indian country. To me, in a way, the most striking lesson of this report is that despite the fact that there seems to be less than 10% broadband deployment in Indian country, and I hope that we'll get a better and better fix on those statistics as we go along. And despite the lack of affordable services in many cases, even where they are available, nevertheless, we see tremendous innovation in tribal activities involving broadband services, whether leveraging terrestrial broadband stations, developing a local ISP, or deploying hybrid wireless wired networks. Tribes' ingenuity and resourcefulness in meeting their communities' needs should inspire us all to find ways to spread these efforts throughout Indian country and indeed throughout the United States. These networks are connecting tribal members to each other and their nations to the world. In addition, tribal technology centers are helping to bridge the digital divide by providing more than just Internet access. These centers are valuable community resources for education, for jobs, and for health information. We applaud the Native Public Media's project, both quantitative and qualitative analysis, to help shed light on the state of broadband Internet access throughout Indian country. NTIA has made a long-run commitment to collect and make available data about broadband availability and Internet use throughout the country. At our workshop just last month on broadband data transparency, we learned very clearly how critical it is to have this kind of information available on an ongoing basis, both for consumers to be able to make wise choices, and also for policymakers to be able to set out a path that will provide affordable broadband access throughout the country. So we look forward to working with the Native Public Media Project and others to increase the amount of information that's available, both qualitative and quantitative, as we go forward in this process. The broadband plan is going to be a critical first step, but as Blair has said, it's just step number one, and it's just critical that we have a clear picture of broadband services availability, of pricing, and of different usage styles throughout the country if we're going to make progress to our long-term goal. This administration, of course, understands the critical connection between broadband adoption and pressing economic challenges. NTIA has been working very closely with Indian country on a variety of tribal concerns, attending tribal conferences and collaborating on outreach efforts throughout the country. Secretary Locke and Assistant Secretary Strickling met with tribal leaders on broadband issues, and NTIA and the Rural Utility Service are working with key tribal stakeholders in creating Tribal Broadband Working Group to continue our collaborative efforts. We also are pleased to have tribal involvement in our current major undertaking, the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, or BTOP. NTIA and RUS received more than $7 billion in Recovery Act funding to promote broadband expansion, and NTIA's portion of those funds is being administered through the BTOP program. We will award the bulk of these dollars, as many of you know, in support of projects to deploy broadband networks in unserved and underserved areas. In addition, we will provide funding to projects that encourage sustainable adoption of broadband services and enhance public computer center capacity at institutions such as community colleges and public libraries. The Recovery Act also provides funds for the development and maintenance of a national broadband inventory map that we're doing together with the FCC, which will provide consumers with better information on broadband services available to them and also inform the public policy efforts to increase broadband availability nationwide. And we hope that those data collection efforts will help your efforts going forward and that we can work collaboratively on those. We're in the midst of reviewing the first round of BTOP applications. I'm actually not in the midst of doing it, but a number of colleagues of mine are working probably almost as hard as the broadband plan team getting through what was, as you probably know, a really extraordinary number of applications with an extraordinary set of great ideas in communities all over the country. We expect to have the first round of awards out sometime next month. In parallel to that, we've also put out a call for public comment on issues related to the implementation of BTOP for the next round of funding. Stakeholders will have the opportunity to provide us with feedback on how the first round worked for applicants, what policy clarifications or changes should be made, and how the agencies can maximize the availability of the programs to meet Recovery Act objectives such as job creation and long-term economic growth. I encourage all of you to participate in this public comment period, which closes on November 30th. I think that what the report highlights for us really, though, is the challenge going forward to encourage the proliferation of innovative broadband access projects such as those documented here. Efforts such as the Coeur d'Alene ISP broadband service and the Southern California Tribal Digital Village Network mentioned already really are setting out extraordinary models, I think, for the rest of Indian country and indeed for many of other parts of rural America and underserved areas. I think it's a tremendous contribution that those efforts have been made, and I think our challenge is really to find a way to support and encourage the spread of those kinds of efforts. These are examples of how creative entrepreneurial efforts can enhance the welfare of Indian country and of rural America in general. So I want to thank you again. Thank you, Sasha, for inviting me to all the report authors and creators. It's a tremendous contribution, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and I want to give both Blair and Danny an opportunity to get back to writing a national broadband plan, giving out a couple $1 billion, but thank you both for coming here today. I also wanted to take a moment just to thank the people that were able to come together and really make this happen. There's on the first real page of the report, page 2, you'll see there's a list of the team that really came together to make this report happen. And it is, if I'm a front man, we've got a couple front women here as well, we're really standing before a large group of people that put in a tremendous amount of time and energy. And I would encourage you to look at sort of the group that came together to do this. And I also wanted to give sort of a special acknowledgement, I guess we say, to the supporters, the funders that made this happen. Jenny Toomey over at the Ford Foundation, Helen Bruner over at the Media Democracy Fund, Charles Benton over at the Benton Foundation. And then there, in my mind, there was this unknown, so the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And just this morning, I got to meet Vincent Curran. And I was like, but before that, I had asked Loris, like, so who is this Vincent Curran guy? And she was like, he was the visionary that made this all possible. He was the guy that years ago figured out that the work that Native Public Media was going to be doing was important enough to support from the very beginning. And so you immediately moved into that table of visionary funder for me, and I'm very thankful that you're here today. We've actually asked him to come up and give a few words in addition to being the respondent afterwards. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Vincent to talk about his thoughts on all of this work and the work that CPB has done to support all of this. Thank you very much.
Thanks for those beyond flattering words. If your day starts with meeting me, I can guarantee you it'll get better from here on out. And I also can't take credit. I first got involved in Native America out of a state of confusion when I first showed up at CPB, and I found out we had all these programs going and didn't really understand how they all connected, and was really working with leaders from Native America all over the country that really led to the founding of Native Public Media. I'll maybe talk just a second about that in a minute or two. Let me start by thanking Native Public Media and the New American Foundation's Open Technology Initiative for its work in researching and creating this report on technology and internet use in Indian country. CPB, as many of you know, I think, has a long history of investing in Native media. We provide direct operating support to about 30 stations owned by Native organizations, and we support policy, programming, and support organizations like Native Public Media, Native American Public Telecommunications, and the Quantitative Broadcasting Company based in Alaska. CPB's support for Native Public Media is grounded in the Public Broadcasting Act, in the Act's mandate to, among other things, serve underserved audiences. And it's hard to imagine a more underserved group than Native America. I think this groundbreaking study will provide critical insight about how we best can serve those underserved audiences. CPB's business plan is centered around what we call the 3 Ds: digital, diversity, and dialogue. Digital represents the need to use all kinds of technologies to reach the communities that we serve. Diversity refers to America's changing demographics and the imperative to serve communities that are increasingly diverse. Dialogue refers to the shift from traditional broadcasting to active community engagement, two-way kinds of communications. I believe the information in this report will help us deliver on digital diversity and dialogue, particularly in our work with Native America. Shortly after I came to CPB to lead its radio policy and grant-making operations in 2003, out of that state of confusion, I decided I needed to educate myself about Native radio. Partnering with the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, we convened several meetings of station leaders. We analyzed the economics of Native radio, and we looked at the programming strategies that Native stations were employing to serve their communities. We commissioned an assessment of the needs and opportunities of these media organizations that led to the funding of Native Public Media and to some degree continues to guide the development of our involvement in Native media today. But the most important thing that I did was tour Indian country to see firsthand what stations were doing in their communities. I received quite the education. I visited Native communities in the Southwest, Upper Midwest, and Alaska. I met station managers, volunteer producers, tribal leaders, Native health service practitioners, and high school students, all involved in Native media. I saw firsthand the role that Native radio was playing in language and cultural preservation, in health education and diabetes prevention, in connecting the far-flung communities and families, and in fostering the active participation of tribal members in tribal issues. I experienced firsthand some of the warmth, richness, and diversity of Native culture. I got a crash education in a topic I was pretty much unaware of when I began my tour: tribal sovereignty. And I saw firsthand the challenging economic and social conditions that characterize many Native communities. So how does that all relate to the report we're talking about today? Well, a few things became very clear very fast, I think, to me and my colleagues who were with me on this tour. First, while traditional broadcasting, the original broadband pipe, was a powerful force for good where it was available, was very clear broadcasting was not going to be enough. Even then, it was apparent to us that the development of online distribution systems was going to be critical to reach Native Americans who were living off the reservation, even for those stations that had native broadcast facilities. And even more important, for those communities, and this is most of them, who are not served by native broadcasting facilities. Second, it was very clear that CPB needed to work with Native leaders to develop a policy and funding framework that took into account the unique nature of Native communities. Policies designed for mainstream America were going to have limited effectiveness in Indian country. Third, wherever I went, I found a ready pool of enthusiastic, committed Native people who had a thirst for using whatever communications tools they could find, whatever they could get their hands on, to serve their communities and engage tribal members on important issues of their communities. One of those enthusiastic, committed people was Loris Taylor. Loris could see the potential for Native media so clearly from her perch as general manager of KUYI on the Hopi Reservation. She had transformed that little station into a critical center of community, and she was clearly anxious to do more. The CPB board visited KUYI a few years ago, and they were amazed at the critical role that station plays and continues to play in that community. And I know because I've seen them. There are dozens of other stations that are just like that. So after we brought the Native stations together at the end of that project, and they asked us to fund what was to become Native Public Media, I was thrilled when Loris agreed to lead the new organization. She's an amazing leader, is doing a terrific job, and is making a real difference. Today's report has some of the same themes that I noticed a few years ago that I just mentioned, and brings a substantial empirical fact base to underpin those observations. The importance of digital distribution in connecting Native communities, and the need for broadband on reservations to make that happen. The need for a policy framework that recognizes and leverages the unique characteristics of Native America, and the pool of media practitioners, experienced and aspiring, ready to take advantage of the tools that become available to them. The report provides essential data and important insights. It will inform planning to enable Native tribes to use broadband technology to serve their communities on reservations and in other parts of the country. It will help to ensure that Native America is not left behind as the country builds a national broadband infrastructure. Congratulations to Native Public Media on their vision and the service that they provide to Native America. And let me just mention, you've heard from 3 people so far today, and I think we've each taken slightly different things away from that report. And to my mind, that's an earmark, that's a characteristic of the very best work of its kind. So I'm looking really forward to see the impact of this report over the coming months. Thank you very much.
So I want to invite Loris Taylor and Tracy Morris and Jeffrey Blackwell and Vincent, before you get too comfortable, you as well, to come back up here. We're going to now turn to the report itself, and after that we'll have Q&A of the thought leaders that pulled this all together. Let me just do a quick introduction to these speakers here. You've already heard about Vincent. Loris Taylor first approached me about creating sort of a in-depth assessment about new media, technology, broadband use. And I thought, this is great. We'll survey like, a half a dozen, maybe a dozen tribes, maybe 15 or 20, and we'll get a lot of really useful information. And Loris was like, oh yeah, that's great. I think that's wonderful. Let's do 50. And my heart stopped. And when it started beating again, and I was like, well, I think we can possibly do 50. She's like, I think we can do 100. And, in my mind, it's that kind of just always pushing the envelope, always pushing boundaries, and having both the vision and the capacity and the leadership skills to really pull this off. As Danny mentioned, we ended up with over 120 tribes represented in the data that we've collected, and that is astounding. I mean, it's really unlike anything else that's been done in this space before, and it's very much due to the leadership that you've brought here. All of this was facilitated and made possible through the hard work of Tracy Morris, who came out and led a lot of the qualitative assessments and pulled this all together and spent countless, endless nights drafting and redrafting and tweaking and revising, resubmitting, all of this work. And she worked tirelessly on the qualitative analyses and case studies and really added the depth of understanding to the quantitative statistics that we had collected. And I would think that she's sort of like if you had sort of a methodological guru and Hercules rolled into one, like that's what Tracy really brought to this work. And of course, all of this work would have been far less efficacious without a first-rate legal mind like Jeffrey Blackwell and the expertise that you brought to this team, both in terms of framing the implications of this research and their regulatory and policy impacts, but also with kind of creating sort of a formula, a roadmap that answers the question that should be in all of our minds after reading this of, so what's next? And so I thank you, all three of you for really being sort of the thought leadership behind this entire endeavor, and welcome you to come up here. I think we'll start with Tracy, and then we'll go to, we'll start with Loris, go to Tracy, and end with Jeff, and then get some final thoughts from Vincent before we open it up to all of you for Q&A.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really just pleased to be here, especially to have people who are recognizing our work. I feel like we're like the small players in this giant pond, and to have Blair Levin and Mr. Weitzner and Vincent Curran here with Native Public Media and the New America Foundation is really quite phenomenal. And I'm here just basically to tell the story, because I think there is a story to be told. And I want to talk about the story from my lens, what I see. I come from a village on the Hopi Reservation where we still don't have running water or electricity or broadband. And these are services that I feel are essential and critical to not just running a household, but also business, education, making sure that people are involved in the electoral process, all kinds of stuff like that, that a lot of us take for granted when we move to communities where these services are readily available. I also know firsthand how unfair and marginalized entire populations and communities can become. When I was a child, we didn't have television or radio in our community. And in high school, in boarding school, when I went away, I really felt inadequate and less than because I didn't have that media exposure. When people were talking about like shows like Dark Shadows or who can I remember, Hopalong Cassidy, I didn't know who these people were or shows were about, and people just, there's something about the psychological framework when people peg you into these little boxes and make you feel like just because you don't know this information that perhaps you might not have the intelligence or capacity to deal with other issues. So I feel that in many respects, the digital divide is that same chasm I faced as a child. I believe that the digital divide is more serious because we have found through our survey and case studies that Native Americans, when given the opportunity to connect to the technology, will use it. And this report finds that Native Americans are not only tech savvy, but we are utilizing digital media and multimedia at that, and communications technologies at rates higher than national norms. So that says a lot. It really means that there are such things as digital natives out there, for real. As a result, for Native Americans to be denied the broadband highway because of existing barriers to entry, or because of the reluctance to embrace new models of deployment, or because of resistance to deploy broadband in highly remote and rural areas by some of our major service providers, or to deny that tribes should be carriers of first resort rather than the last. It's all the same to me. If we condone this, then we marginalize entire communities and the generations to follow. And that's why this story is so important. I'm really pleased by the willingness of our federal partners at the FCC and NTIA and RUS to address this divide in Native America by having a direct conversation with tribal leaders and tribal governments. And I know that the findings of the survey and the case study will help to forge solid policy if only they listen to what's contained in the report. While the findings from this report are exploratory, I'll have to remind people that we're such a small organization. And if it were up to me, I would have done a study across all 564 tribal nations. That really was my dream. And I remember having a staff meeting and telling them that that's exactly what we were going to do, and was quickly told that that would be an impossibility because of costs and resources and staff capacity. But I think what we've done is really to provide the first window, a glimpse into the landscape of what broadband looks like in Indian country and where our shortfalls might be. We have learned a lot of things from the case study, and even as a native, I'm astounded by what we were able to find. We learned that a tribal and community-centric approach of deploying broadband on tribal lands really takes into account the interests of the collective whole of the people that we serve. It's very important. It means that by connecting major and essential institutions first on tribal homelands, the community approach really makes certain that the jobs and the workforce of the tribal nation are secured by its connection to the necessary technology. These essential institutions include the tribal government headquarters, the Indian Health Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, local educational institutions, radio stations, public safety centers, and computer centers. And it really makes sense in tribal tradition. You know, if you take care of the strength and the core of the community in terms of deployment, you're taking care of the people. It's a very holistic viewpoint. In Indian country, it's the community core that is primary. And in Native America, sustainability is viewed through the lens of seeing the internet as a public good, as vital as electricity and water to the community, instead of a commodity where you depend on subscribers. While the report provides us into the window of what works in Native America, in Coeur d'Alene, or in Montana and other places, we also have found and have, through this data, found that there's still a huge disparity, as we've all known all along, in tribal communities, and that the digital divide is real, and that compared to where the rest of the nation is, we're addressing, hopefully, some challenges that we can overcome together, issues of access and coverage and affordability. So I think in short, the greater that Native Americans are removed, and the less we are involved in shaping the National Broadband Plan, the digital divide will continue. And so I think it's important that we have this voice at the table. And literally yesterday, we gave up Jeffrey to the National Broadband Plan. Whether he was willing or not, we said, here's someone you can call on, and please, do so. He does have a full-time job. So I can't underscore enough how important this report is to Native America. It's the first data that's coming out of Native America by Native Americans for Native Americans with the help of some really strong allies. When we first started this process, there were countless consultations with experts around the country, including the New America Foundation, in designing and vetting and norming the instruments, the survey and the questionnaire. There were visits into tribal communities. There were extensive interviews with individuals from tribal communities. And there was all the analysis that took place that took hours and hours of work. So I just want to recognize a few people here that I thought were really instrumental, and we couldn't have done it without a whole lot of people. The leadership of New America Foundation for this project was led by Sasha Meinrath. He is an incredible person. I've really come to appreciate all that you have done for Native public media and for Native America in this broadband conversation and dialogue, and hopefully the forging of policy as a result. So if we could just recognize Sasha Meinrath. And in Sasha Meinrath's village of technologists, there was Daniel Meredith. Daniel is, I don't know, there he is in the back. Fabulous. Benjamin Lenneth. There he is. James Losey. And Joshua Braithbard.
He's in New York City right now, trying for testimony before the New York City Council tomorrow.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. And on the Native Public Media team, I thought we had a stellar group as well. This Chickasaw woman literally came out of nowhere and pulled the project together, and I am certainly indebted to her. I've never seen anyone work so hard day and night. Tracy Morris, who is our policy and program analyst. Camille LaCapa, who couldn't be here with us today. Carolyn Caton. There she is. Of course, someone who I hold in high esteem, Jeffrey Blackwell, who's our advisory chairperson, and he's also the chair of the National Congress of American Indians Telecom Subcommittee. Peggy Berryhill, who's our director of program services. Oh, she's hiding way back there. And someone who was there consistently, day and night, for advice, Carol Pearson, President and CEO of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters. And just so that I'm on a roll with the thank yous, I want to thank the Coeur d'Alene Nation, Cawville Nation, the Southern California Tribal Digital Village, the Nation of Leech Lake, the Gros Ventre and Assiniboine Nation, the Lakota Ojibwe of Wisconsin, and of course the funders and investors, the Benton Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Ford Foundation, the Media Democracy Fund, and my advisory council, of whom Roanne Robinson Shaddix is here today. Thank you so much. And with that, I just want to close by saying that this is just the first step. We all know that a national broadband plan has to be driven by good data. We hope that we're providing that. And I thank you so much for being here today.
Great.
Yeah, I'm an academic. Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Morris, and yes, I am an academic. It's in my blood. So when they asked me if I wanted a PowerPoint, I was really excited. Yeah. So I'm going to fill you in today on just a really brief overview of the study. How do I change the slide, the puncher here? Okay. So I spent a lot of time, let me just tell you, I was part-time for a long time this year with Native Public Media, and they were working on this study, and at the very bitter end I was asked to help pull some of this data together. So I just have to thank everybody for their hard work, everybody at New America, everybody at NPM, Loris and Jeff, Sasha, James, Dan, Ben. Thank you very, very much. I have to thank you all as well. And Carolyn, yes. So what I'm going to do is just briefly overview it. There we go. That's really fast. First, just a few quick points, and then I'll go through methodology and the two parts of the study. This is a foundational study, and it really does contain the first credible and valid data of Internet use among Native Americans. What it found was that overall, participants were extremely tech-savvy, utilizing digital media at rates that were much higher than national norms, which is a really huge finding. That's probably one of the biggest findings that was amazing to us, is that the folks are using it, and they're using it at a higher rate. I have to say personally, I wasn't surprised at this. I've seen this in my prior life as an academic. I saw this among my students. They are engaged in this media, and so I wasn't surprised that the data reflected that. The findings, however, should not be misconstrued to mean that broadband access is widely available. It certainly is not. It just means that folks are resourceful, and they have found ways to access the media one way or the other. There are select tribal communities who have successfully deployed Internet in areas unserved by non-tribal providers, and they provide a model for adoption and deployment. And community-centric approaches work well in Indian country. They reflect Indian country's strengths. So the study methodology is really a two-part study, hence the title, the very long title. I didn't think about that when we were picking the title, how long it would be. But it is, and it is a qualitative and a quantitative study. The first part is a quantitative study. It is the data that Sasha and his team worked so hard with on with us. And the second part is the case studies, which exhibit digital excellence in Indian country. So the quantitative analysis is really an assessment of existing Internet capacity in Indian country. The study was initiated under NPM in collaboration with New America, and it was a 54-question survey administered via SurveyMonkey. It was also administered face-to-face at a number of national meetings, National Congress of American Indians and such. And it basically asked respondents basic demographic information about multimedia use, Internet technology use, in order to understand usage in Indian country. Subsequent questions ranged from use of Internet for driving directions to political research to blogging. And the survey also gathered information regarding access and cost of services, including telephone, computer, and cell phone. Those are all graphed out in the first part of the study. Additionally, respondents were asked about Internet technology media use, including posting of music, videos, text messaging, etc. And this data was normed with samples from the Pew 2008 Spring Tracking Survey, the Pew Internet and American Life Project's Annual Gadget Survey, and the Pew Internet and American Life Project December 2006 Tracking Survey, and finally the Pew and American Life Project's Consumer Choice Survey. Glad to know that their titles are as long as ours. Okay, so a couple of quick facts about the quantitative. We had respondents from over 120 tribes. We've echoed that already here, living in 28 states that completed this study. It began in October of 2008, continued through September of this year. NPM staff, as I said, also surveyed random conference attendees at National Congress of American Indians, Indian Gaming Conference, and they were both held in Phoenix, Arizona in 2009. In total, 196 surveys were fully completed. 182 of these were fully completed out of the 196, which is really an amazing figure. And the survey encapsulated perspectives from young adults to elderly, ranging from born in 1934 to born in 1989. The median birth year was about 1963. And this respondents spanned a variety of educational backgrounds as well, and there's a number of other demographics which I think are probably too much for here. But the main picture we take away from this is that overall participants in this study, this part of the study, were extremely tech savvy, and again, we're utilizing digital media at higher rates than their counterparts. So the qualitative case study. During the fall of this year, we initiated and implemented a series of analysis of 6 case studies of digital excellence in Indian country. These were exemplar sites. They were widely diverse, and these studies comparatively map out existing resources and infrastructure, tribal involvement in development of technology resources, funding resources, internet access, and community involvement. These successful projects included several specific factors. Commitment from tribal council. They all had strong leadership. They all employed planning and suggested more planning. There was a huge investment in human capital and community technology centers. I just want to say a couple things about each of these points. With the commitment from the community, the tribal council, it's really an extremely important point, and it's interesting to note that there was a commonality. All these tribes, all of these different diverse types of networks that existed, and it ranges from radio and deployment to full internet service provider. They all emerged organically from the ground up through the visionary leadership of a person who had an idea and just saw a funding opportunity, knew the resources in the community and who to work with, and they put it together. They just put it together. It was simply amazing. All of them did express that planning was an integral part of it, but they all recommended plan, plan, plan when asked, what can people do? Plan more, which I felt was interesting. The other very interesting point to me, which really reflects, I think, Indian country, is the investment in human capital and the community. They all, in various capacities, are investing in not only their network, but in their community, bringing them back, whether it's training kids to build computers for computer centers, whether it's training people to work in the computer centers, whether it's investing in getting people certifications to work in these centers. That, to me, was very profound, and it was very reflective to me of Indian country as a whole. And then, of course, the community technology centers themselves, which represents that community-centric approach we've been talking about. But the establishment of a community technology center is essential in bridging that digital divide and promoting community engagement. So a couple quick facts. The case studies are a compelling picture for the potential in Native American broadband development and adoption of technology. These successful networks are emblematic of a long history of Native self-sufficiency and pioneering creative solutions to fulfill the needs of their communities. And faced with limited resources and means, motivated individuals, these visionary leaders I've talked about, have provided their communities with new ways to connect and communicate with each other and the rest of the world. There's even a Native American YouTube, and you'll read about it. Read about it. I'm not going to tell you where it is. You have to read the study. These case studies undermine any ill-conceived assumption that Native communities are uninterested in the technology or the internet. And finally, these findings, I think, demonstrate that Native America wants access to the communication tools of the 21st century and will take advantage of available technology in the community. So that is my very brief overview. 80 pages and eight slides. So, I'm going to pass it on and let Jeffrey talk about the policy implications, since that is his purview.
Chukma Kambakche. My name is Jeff Blackwell. I am thrilled to be here today. I'm tingling. As is appropriate, I bring greetings on behalf of the National Congress of American Indians and the regrets but the hearty congratulations of our president, newly elected President Jefferson Keel, of the executive director, Jacqueline Johnson, and of our immediate past president, Joe Garcia of Oquia-Wingate, Pueblo. For those of you who do not know, Jefferson Keel is the lieutenant governor of the Chickasaw Nation, and we are particularly proud that a Chickasaw was involved. For those who do not also know, in this room, there are those who were at the epicenter of this movement a decade ago, and it would be inappropriate for us to go forward without recognizing their involvement. Commissioner Gloria Tristani, who was instrumental in moving the commission at the time, and Chairman Bill Kennard to implement a tribal lands initiative at the FCC, and was instrumental in convincing me to go to work at the FCC at the time. Former colleague and sister from Hopi, Roanne Robinson, who was instrumental in helping coin the phrase digital divide, and was involved at a point in time at NTIA when a great big light was being shined on these issues. There are two representatives here from the FCC, a former colleague, Thomas Wyatt, and the current Native American senior attorney, tribal liaison at the FCC, Shayna Barehand, who, much like me, we've learned has succumbed to that wonderful gravitational pull of Indian country and will be leaving the commission, but we thank her very much for her service. And I want to say a personal thank you for taking a program that I helped begin there, the ITI program, and taking it to new heights, including outreach to focus specifically on broadband and broadcast. I will tell you something. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and we are beginning to travel and take her to places along with her younger sister, who is 4, to parts of Indian country. And I'm reminded, I'm descended from 4 tribes. I'm an enrolled member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. I work for the Chickasaw Nation. I'm also Omaha and Choctaw. And I spent a lot of time growing up with family across Indian country. By marriage, my brother and I figured that we're related to about 8 other tribes, which made dating very, very difficult. Indian country is not 6 degrees of separation. It's 2 or 3. But my brother and I, we were talking about how many our experiences growing up and just how bored we were at certain times in the summers or during the holidays or years that we lived in Indian country. And we were talking about the experiences of our children now that our children are that age and why they say, "Dad, it's so boring. What can we do?" Well, part of it was because we were disconnected. We began to learn. I was very fortunate to go to a college that had one of the first intranets in the United States and saw it in the fall of 1988. And I thought it was really cool because you could look up in the library and see whether or not there was a book that was available rather than to have to trudge through 4 feet of snow and, hazard getting frostbite. I assure you I got frostbite, but it was not in the library. I had the great fortune, my parents went into debt to be able to send me abroad to school, and I saw one of the first internets in France. It was called Minitel. You could look up weather reports and travel and whether or not an airplane was arriving in the airport. It is important to note, and many of you remember a time when we would go to the airport and sit and wait. Oh, well, the flight's been delayed. Well, we'll sit here another couple hours. Hey, what's the weather going to be today? Hey, what's driving going to be today? It's important to remember as we go forward that there are still children in Indian country who can't look up whether or not there are books in the library, or when the weather is changing, or when somebody will be coming to visit. So that's sort of the reason why we're here. But I'm excited, ever the optimist, I'm excited to look forward and not backward, to build upon this wonderful study, this groundbreaking study, that I want to underscore some of what I cannot restate with any greater eloquence than what Loris has already told you about the opinions of Indian country when it comes to a lack of broadband service. I would underscore that this study, we've all heard the jokes about smoke signals. In Indian country, we suffer from not only historical but modern stereotypes that we are lazy, uneducated, that we do not participate in the national economy, that we are, oh, those Indians. That is simply not true. And this study finally dispels that. It proves what we know and have known for some time, that our communities, our cultures are some of the most highly adaptive in the history of the world. And we're ready not just to serve ourselves, to provide that service to ourselves, to become that mitochondria in our communities that lead us into the new world, the new global economy, but to genuinely contribute to that new global economy. There are many tribal leaders who are trying to stimulate the national economy as well as their own. So with that, I suppose we're supposed to go through some policy recommendations. And I feel you're paying 80 pages in 8 slides, years of learning and a new study that emphatically proves many of the, and reproves and founds anew some of the policy recommendations that come to us from this experience. Let's see, that's gone. Oh my goodness. We actually do have 2 slides on it.
Yeah, we did have policy slides.
And we have tech support. Did they leave? They did leave. Okay, well, the first one is pretty obvious. You don't need a slide for it necessarily. It's the need to implement a new and robust strategic initiative targeting tribal communications development. We're in a situation where we have a lack of reference to tribes in the Communications Act of '34 or the Telecom Act of '96. The Commission has done an admirable job when they've had the bat in their hands to write tribes into the rules and are actually undertaking some incredible new measures that heretofore had not been possible. One need only look into the dockets of the Media Bureau, Wireless Bureau, and see some pretty incredible movement. But we need to seize upon that momentum. We need to seize upon the momentum right now to start a new, and with this new charge given to us by Native Public Media, to start a new initiative. And there are tribal leaders that caution me to use the word initiative because it doesn't have teeth in it. So we've got to find a better word than that. But it really sort of has 3 charges within this new initiative. This is speaking broadly. This is just not to NTIA and to the FCC, but to Congress and to our tribal governments as well, who work with their federal partners. The first is determine whether or not, the first charge under this new initiative should be to determine whether or not the current federal regulatory frameworks operate successfully to address the issues. You heard Mr. Levin say we're talking about different economies on tribal lands, and we're also talking about different, you've heard Loris reference, we have different anchor institutions. When I say we have different economies, I mean what we're trying to deal with here in creating the new framework for broadband on tribal lands is a historical disconnection that was at points in time intended to disconnect tribal lands. Need not go into the terrible history. A second major point under this rubric of a new and robust strategic initiative is to create new government consultation methods between our tribal governments and the federal government to identify barriers to entry and achievable responsive solutions. Let's find what will really work. We need new business models. We need new investment. It's true that no critical infrastructure has come to Indian country that hasn't come as a result of significant federal regulation, federal investment, and federal involvement over time. The third is that we have to be very vigilant once we identify those barriers to remove them. We cannot simply sit back and say, well, this is a barrier and we're going to need to re-examine that and we're going to need to open a docket. We're going to need to address that on Capitol Hill. We're going to have to find the solutions. No better time than the present. Every day our lands fall farther behind. Our second policy recommendation, and perhaps we will get a PowerPoint in a minute. Okay, good deal. Is that within the charge of the Federal Communications Commission by Congress to create a National Broadband Plan, that they indeed create a tribal broadband plan within that national plan, recognizing fundamentally we're talking about different economics, and that, as this study has proven, in order to create sustainable models in Indian country, noting that sustainability does not always mean profitability. Some tribes have simply foregone profitability to be able to create service as a public good. that we need to recognize the tribal-centric approach works in Indian country. That if you are going to create service in a broadband plan that is simply predicated on residential service or consumers as the endpoint, we don't have the population density, we don't have the demographics, we don't have the geopolitical situation to support that. That's the experience of the last 10 years. But if you engage our institutions, if you begin with our governments, if you engage our anchor institutions, and you put the tribe at the center of the plan, then you have the type of demand aggregation that a model can be built upon, a profitable model can be built upon. There are many tribes right now, many industry participants who are examining these models in real time with the possibility of getting federal funding in the broadband stimulus program. A third major recommendation that comes directly from the study is to create new and effective means of consultation and coordination with tribal governments. And very quickly, I will tell you, that includes the creation of a formal joint Native Nations and FCC broadband task force. We have tribal governments, we have folks, we have representatives that we have elected. They've been elected on their understanding of their communities, their peoples, both historical and modern. And it is important that we begin to identify with our federal partner the tasks that we've been talking about to be able to move forward. This wouldn't simply be an advisory committee. This would be a task force that genuinely identifies needs and how to meet those needs, and then should be held responsible to meet those. For some time, the persons engaged in the development of telecommunications both within Indian country and outside of Indian country across this town have felt the need for the creation of a tribal office within the Federal Communications Commission. And in greater detail in this study than we've ever seen before, the recommendations for such an office are laid out. That it should be at a high level within the agency and have an effective impact with the appropriate staff and budget to be able to help that agency effectuate its trust relationship, its fiduciary obligations with the tribes. There is a recommendation to create seats upon the federal-state joint board on universal service for tribal government representatives. I told you earlier that no critical infrastructure has come to Indian country without significant federal investment, and there's a glaring need to have a tribal voice on that federal-state joint board. It has the ability to initiate rulemakings in the FCC's process, and we need a greater interaction among the separate sovereigns that touch the ground in Indian country and close by. There are recommendations for Universal Service Fund reform. These are conversations that I've had. I first met Valerie Fastsource of the Coeur d'Alene tribe in the spring of 2000. Valerie's background is from the military. She was working as a communications expert in the first Gulf War. And when she went home, she wanted to bring that expertise. We met at a conference that the Federal Communications Commission held, and she, in a very determined way, said, we're going to build a network, and we're going to find the funding for it, and we're going to make it sustainable. And she had several, in a way I've never, grilled me like a Senate inquiry about the operation of the Universal Service Fund. And they chose a model that was did not qualify for Universal Service Fund support. And we're very nervous. The Indian country, I think she's emblematic of the way that Indian country looks at the Universal Service Fund, is concerned about the possibility that this fund that is so critical to services in Indian country, may collapse upon itself. And there was a point in time when certain tribes said, well, we're going to try to figure out how to do this, and if we don't, we're not sure we'd be able to rely upon the fund. There's so many questions that are going on in Washington right now, and really it stalled a few of the development projects that are now rejuvenated with shovel-ready intentions. The Enhanced Tribal Lands Lifeline and Link-Up program has been essential to low-income telephone support in Indian country because it fundamentally addresses one of the challenges that we have cyclically impoverished communities in Indian country. And there's a recommendation that comes straight from these persons who have developed broadband networks outside of the Universal Service Fund paradigm to create a tribal universal service fund program within the universal service fund. That is a big deal. That's a very large discussion to have way beyond this room, and probably includes 535 folks up on Capitol Hill, not just 5 commissioners at the FCC. But it is fundamental that we begin to realize that our investment needs to be in broadband, moving towards this new paradigm, this new opportunity. The Universal Service Fund recommendations are, and ultimately the discussion among all those in Indian country, no matter what the solution that they've settled upon, there are 8 tribally owned and operated telephone companies in the United States as well that come to these issues for their nations in the more traditional telephone service context. Everyone agrees now, Valerie and others, we will pay into the fund if we can get out of the fund. That is one of the ways in which we can continue to develop and deploy from our anchor institutions to our communities, to our community members. There are recommendations involved that, to revise the E-rate healthcare programs in the Universal Service Fund to allow connectivity for after-hours use. There's precedent here. The Federal Communications Commission has actually already waived the rule for usage after hours in Alaska. It's an order that has 4 or 5 years on it in this regard. Another major request of Indian country is to increase access to spectrum and to remove barriers to use of spectrum by tribal entities. There is not a lack of spectrum in the United States to be able to support the things that we want to do for wireless solutions. There is a lack of access to it. And we note that Congress asked the FCC to, in those 12 questions that Mr. Levin referred to, Congress asked them for heady recommendations. You know, what can we do? What needs to be changed? There are a number of things that need to be examined. We have many places in Indian country that are covered by the major license holders who have not been able to find a business model to make it reasonable and justifiable to their shareholders to be able to build out onto tribal lands. We need to find ways to put spectrum into the hands of those that would value it the most and would indeed find those business models, work with our anchor institutions to build out. There are recommendations for the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, immediate recommendations that come as a result of this study. One is to establish a tribal priority for broadband funding for tribal entities providing services, applying for broadband stimulus monies to provide service on their own lands. There are several recommendations that come in as a result to the first round notice of funds availability that was released by the Rural Utility Service and the National Telecommunications Information Administration to overcome barriers presented to entry by that notice of funds availability. There are matching funding challenges. There are challenges involving population density, the inability to approach some of this service as a traditional industry participant. I will give you a quick stat that our friend Matt Rantana at the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association asked me to convey to you, and that he presented formally at the National Congress of American Indians. Now, you have in your hands a study that shows that the Southern California Tribal Digital Village is one of the best models in America for the deployment of wireless services on tribal lands, and not just to one tribe, but to several tribes. Matt and his team, an extraordinary group of people, put in about 400 hours in the application for the broadband funding. And at the end of the day, when they went through the self-scoring process, and to know Matt is to know that he would give himself really high marks on every point. He estimates that the best they could score was a 57 out of 100. So we've got some work to do there. There's a recommendation that tribal approval for broadband projects on tribal lands must be required. We welcome those in industry who wish to work with us. With that very recognition, we're talking about different economies, and we're talking about different types of anchor institutions. Tribes cannot do this alone. Tribes cannot create this from thin air. But recognize that we have authority. We know our communities the best, and we have our governments. It's an old joke. What are the first 3 words that an Indian baby learns? Mama, Papa, and jurisdiction. The reason for that is that we have learned, the last 200 years have taught us that if we don't have control of our future, we're not going to be able to provide for those children. So that's why sovereignty is so important to us. The other recommendation that comes, and it was because of a call to make sure that it was included, was that the Rural Utility Service implements regulations that they received in the 2008 Farm Bill involving significantly underserved trust areas. There is a recommendation here for greater federal funding for education and adoption, and the creation of a new federal program mechanism to meet the myriad planning and startup needs for deployment. The broadband stimulus money is here for a moment. We're not going to be able, it's not a solve all the ills of Indian country from a broadband perspective. It's a stimulus bill that's designed to get people moving and get money moving in local economies, and to do so through the creation of open networks. We're still going to have challenges going forward to be able to fund, to be able to create capacity building, to undertake the kind of projects that we're talking about here. And for those existing networks, I mentioned the 8 tribally owned telephone companies, they've actually adopted broadband ahead of the curve in terms of their competitors with similar technologies just off reservation, partially because they are tribally owned, because they have to answer to that tribal council that said, you shall go into deep debt, you shall build out, because nobody else will. We need to help them, and we need new federal mechanisms to be able to do that. Not all of it is money. Not all of it's money. To be sure, some of it is, but some of it also is the sharing of intellectual capacity and technical assistance. With that, as a board member on the board of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, as the newly elected chair of Native Public Media, it's my pleasure to deliver to the staff of Native Public Media as well the 8th recommendation, further additional research and analysis. And I will say this about my friend Sasha. I met Sasha a few years ago on a panel in Minneapolis, and there were a couple of folks there who were talking in ways that I really had trouble relating to. And then this fellow Sasha stood up and he shifted the entire dialogue of what was going on in the room, and it was really thankful because he got everybody paying attention, and I had to go right after him. And then I thought, oh, whoa, I have to go right after him. Sasha, I will say this to you as a friend and colleague. If you keep this up, we're going to have to build a monument to you in Indian country. So there are additional research. There is additional research that's needed. Identifying the characteristics of successful native digital leaders and visionaries is critical. We need to build more cyber warriors like Valerie Fasthorse and Matt Rantanen in Indian country. We need to understand how leaders and communities responded to sudden opportunities in their environment. We have a wonderful mechanism now for a sudden opportunity if you've got a shovel ready. But we need to understand how these communities responded to these sudden opportunities when it comes to government and NGO programs. We also need a survey of different models for community technology centers. Now, to Jenny and Helen and Vinny and others who have funded this, thank you very much. On behalf of tribal leadership, on behalf of my family, my extended family in Indian country, thank you very much for your support. We will be back. I'll stand at the door with a plate if I have to. But I'm yours for any questions, and I'm just very, very thankful. There have been a lot of nice things that have been said about me personally. My contribution to this was in a couple specific areas. These ladies and gentlemen are the ones that put the yoke on their back and carried the full burden and did it in incredible time. And in time, by the way, for an open docket at the FCC that we will be putting this into. But it has been my pleasure, and I'm the beneficiary, and it has enriched my life to be able to work with these organizations. So thank you.
Let me just make a couple of observations, if I could. I'll try to keep it brief. One is, fortunately, I flew in last night, not today, given what I'm hearing about the traffic control system, from Minneapolis, where Minnesota Public Radio and then the CBB board met for 2 days on the state of journalism in the country. And it seems to me like, ironically, there's sort of an ironic situation which is developing. a guy by the name of Jeff Cole from the Annenberg School at USC presented some of his research, which basically shows that nobody under 40 is reading newspapers anymore. And so they're accessing news, but they're not accessing it through the newspaper. And a lot of the first day was spent with newspaper publishers talking about different things that they were doing to try to come up with new business models that would get them through what is looking like a pretty horrific transition. And my sense from sitting as an observer in the room is I wasn't really hearing anything that made me very confident in the ability of traditional newspaper publishers to succeed in doing that. And I think the connection here is that Blair Levin made a comment about being disconnected, and I think in some very fundamental ways mainstream America is about to become disconnected as some of the primary information channels that people are used to using decline in quality and really are about to go through what I think are going to be several years of declining success and usefulness. New models are going to be developing. People are working on it now, and in some ways that we're at a new point where the ground is level, and I think that creates a tremendous opportunity for Native America to participate in a way that it hasn't before, as people are rethinking kind of these information structures, and as there's interest in building out broadband capacity in Native America. I think there are opportunities there for creative thinking and swift action. So that's kind of point one. Point two is I just want to state a caution here, which was something that we found when we did the assessment of Native American radio back in 2003, 2004. And Karen Lawrence, you can correct me on this, but I think one of the challenges that we found right away was, again, a little bit ironic in that there. And from my perch at CPB, I think this is we are also experiencing this. It's easier to get funding for hardware than for services. And what happened in Native America is that stations were able to organize and come forward to the facilities program at NTIA and get funding to build transmitters, erect towers. But there was very little funding to support the development of producers and content to use those towers effectively. Now I'm sort of seeing the same thing again in the digital conversion funding that CPB has enjoyed from Congress. We're very thankful for as we've changed America's television transmission from analog to digital, and we're in the process of doing that with radio. Congress is interested in funding the hardware. Now, as television has become complete, we're investing more and more funds in okay, so now that we've got all this increased capacity, how are we going to use it? And it happens to be coming at a very critical time right now because we just tallied up at our board meeting yesterday. We have something like $10 million out in investments in journalism projects to try to figure out how broadcasters can use this new digital bandwidth that they have through these new transmission systems and as well online applications to begin to fill in the gap with kind of public service media, public service journalism as traditional journalism fails. Now, that use of those funds, we have been in conversations with the staff at various committees at Congress about, and there's some understanding that that's important, but I think there's a sense that, well, the hardware is done, so really you should go back to kind of the normal appropriation process to figure out how to use, and that doesn't work. And so, as we build out broadband facilities in tribal America, I think it's very important to have at a very high level in that conversation. It's not just about the facilities, it's about developing the people, the services, the economic models that you were talking about, all of that other stuff, so that we don't have kind of what we had with Native America in terms of its radio broadcasting in the year 2000 or so, which was great facilities and a very limited ability to actually leverage those facilities to create positive service in Native America.
So now it's your guys' turn to go up here. but feel free to ask questions of any of the folks on the panel, and please do also wait for the microphone because this is being recorded and streamed for those that couldn't make it here today. So go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Phoebe Mills Ferris. I'm Pamunkey from the Powhatan Lenape Nation. Is there going to be any outreach or research with state-recognized tribes who don't have that direct federal relationship with the FCC or the government?
We don't have any real immediate plans right now, but we do understand the need to reach out to our brothers and sisters who are not federally recognized. For those of you who are not familiar with Native America, there are 564 Native nations in this country who are recognized by the federal government. Hence a government-to-government relationship with these nations. There are, however, many Native Americans in this country who are not recognized by the federal government. That includes our brothers and sisters in Hawaii, many tribes around the country. And so we do get requests from time to time from tribal members who are not federally recognized to be included, and have extended some of our services to non-federally recognized tribes where we can.
I would like to add, there is a diversity advisory committee to the Federal Communications Commission, and we've been examining a body of law that is the development of a 1995 decision called the Adirondack decision that does not allow federal agencies the ability to work to create programs that are race-based. And if a tribe is not federally recognized, then it falls into a questionable area in that analysis. I represent diversity on that advisory committee. I sit on the advisory committee, and we've discussed this in our constitutional issues subcommittee. Very much like to learn where we can engage some state-recognized tribes, and perhaps with the 8 tribes that are in Virginia. I visited Pamunkey lands before. Perhaps we can help bring some of those nuances and some of those concerns to the FCC. In our recommendations to the Commission, we did make we did have a placeholder there for tribes that would fall into that category.
Who's next? Up here in the front.
Hi, greetings from Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Shirley Snavy. I'm Executive Director of Native American Public Telecommunications. It's great to see you guys. Congratulations on what great work you're doing, Loris. It sounds wonderful. I wanted to just say a couple things about what Vinny said about training and the lack of newspapers and dying newspapers. Is that we, NAPT, is banding together with Native American Journalists Association with the help of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting July 21st through the 25th in St. Paul, Minnesota, to bring a convergence conference in Indian country to address the needs of how do you feed content that's authentic and high quality. So stay tuned. We'll call on you to help us plan that session with Naja, and I got a commitment of funding also from Annie E. Casey yesterday, so we're real happy that we're moving forward with that.
Great. Other questions that folks have? Yes.
Hi, I'm Robert Bull with CPB. When you look at the data and you start to, and I know it's foundational information, but I'm wondering if you could give a little bit of nuance to generational issues about the data, male, female, income, and try to give it a little sense of, what is the nuance of adoption in terms of technology and usage of technology.
Sure, I have that here. I was going to read it and I didn't because it's pretty statistical. We have respondents spanned a variety of educational backgrounds. First of all, 9% had high school degree or less, 41% had technical and vocational or some college, 23% had completed college, 27% had advanced degrees or postgraduate training. Respondents sample was middle income and the median yearly household income of $40,000 to $50,000. However, 1 in 3 had a total family income of less than $40,000, and 1 in 5 respondents had a total income of less than $30,000. 69% were employed full-time, with an additional 7% employed part-time, 6% were self-employed, 4% were retired, and 4% were students.
So what does that say in terms of the sample that you were looking at, which was being recorded? The sample that you were looking at was a sample where you were directly either doing SurveyMonkey or going to association meetings or whatnot. How would you take that and generalize that? And what do you think about a strategy in terms of increasing adoption amongst tribal tribal members?
Well, I think first of all, this represents a connected group of tribal folks. So we certainly have to acknowledge that. I mean, SurveyMonkey isn't surveying people who are not connected, although we did approach people at National Congress of American Indians and National Indian Gaming Association. Probably a next step would need to be involve surveying people who aren't connected in seeing what that encompasses. Although in the case studies, we saw, in each of the 6 case studies, the communities may not all of them are fully connected, but it doesn't mean people aren't using them at community centers. So folks are using it, just doesn't mean that they all have access to it in their home. And there probably needs to be some research into those nuances right there. If they're not using it, how many of them are using it in community centers or schools or libraries, and where they're having to travel to use it and such. That I would think that would be a logical next step to get a broader access to it. But people, you have to remember that even in reservations, folks, there's a very mobile population. Folks travel. I mean, healthcare is in major cities in so many communities, so folks are traveling to cities. They may be accessing in places where they don't live, but they're into the internet. They're very excited about the internet and the possibilities it brings to their community. And so I think that the data will probably reflect, early on when we had the data, we were about halfway through the year, the data reflected exactly what it does now, but we were like, okay, if we get 6 more months of this, is it going to bear out? But it did bear out. I would suspect it's going to bear out, even if we take it to people who are less connected than the folks in this study.
Gloria, yes.
Gloria Tristani. I heard early on, I think Blair Levin may have said this and someone echoed this, that broadband availability in Indian country was somewhere between 4 and 10%. How do you grapple with that? And it's amazing that you have people as connected as you do for your surveys, but how do you grapple with that? Because I think it's about 70% nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
I have one quick response, and then I'll pass it on. I would say that two things. People are very resourceful, and we see that here. Indian country is resourceful. But secondarily, I think that it is an unprecedented opportunity for Indian country to be at the table when a natural resource is being developed. And I think that's how we'll grapple with it.
I would add to that also that we've consistently seen a couple of real misnomers. The first one that I always hear right out of the gate is those people wouldn't want to be online. They don't need, and we've seen a number of studies. It's like those that aren't online don't want to be online. And what our data are showing is, hell yeah, they want to be online. And then what we hear after we present these data are like, oh, well, you've just cherry-picked those really tech-savvy, connected folks. Those are the ones that want to be online, but the rest of the communities don't really give a damn. And so that's where Tribal Digital Village. Well, yeah, but that's where also Tribal Digital Village, Coeur d'Alene, all of these case studies demonstrate, oh no, hell yes, they all want to be online. And when it's available, when you come up with these innovative business models that might differ from what the telco incumbents are providing, that you see huge uptake that's far greater than we see in the general populace throughout the United States. And I think that points to just the strong desires in a lot of these communities for the media and the multimedia and the cultural components that this facilitates. And so we're constantly hitting back and saying, like, all of these stereotypes that have been out there are wrong, and our data and our analyses turn them all on their head.
I think I can add also, it's a very good question, because it's sort of like work it works against the overall picture that we have of Native America as being disconnected, which is very true. I invite you all to come to my reservation if you want some time off from your Blackberries and your laptops. You will not be connected. But I can tell you that there are instances on my reservation, for example, where we have very limited connectivity of going to places where we can get connected. On the Navajo reservation, there are parents who literally drive their children a round trip of 60 miles to the chapter house, where it might be the only hot spot for miles around, so that their children can get onto the internet to do their homework. That really like polarizes what's happening out there. If there's a connection somewhere, people will try to go out and find it. For many years, I managed the radio station on the Hopi Reservation. We were on dial-up, and I can tell you that we tried very hard to be connected to the outside world. Dial-up cost us around, I would say, if we used it sparingly, long-distance connection, around $300 a month, just to get the internet connection. So if you're talking about fees, we paid like a hefty amount just to get dial-up. Now, we moved to satellite thinking that that was the next big step up. We had huge latency issues. Just about a month ago, I had this really exciting call from the Hopi Reservation. They are now connected to the fiber highway. I mean, that's like the platinum highway out there. Very exciting for my reservation. Means that now that we have the fiber highway, it means that all the major anchor institutions are connected. It means that our chances of getting connected are even greater. You know, we can perhaps go down to the local school or someplace else to get connected. And so I think it's sort of like, if I could say, if it's sparingly, if it's existing in very like rare circumstances. I don't know if that's how you would describe it, but if it's out there, it's like water. We'll go out and find it because we want to be connected and we want to do everything else that people want to do. If you have a mobile phone, I mean, my gosh, you know, I think that's going to be really the technology of the future, where we would do our banking from wherever. It could be on the Mesa top. And that commercial with Verizon, can you hear me now? It's in my village. I literally see village people like walking through the plaza or to the edge of the mesa. They're trying to get a cell phone signal, and they're turning this. It's really quite comical to watch, but it's really how it is out on reservations.
I'd like to add just a couple.
I'd like to just respond for a minute. Oh, I think it's an important. I'm Peggy Berryhill with Native Public Media, and I did a lot of the groundwork with the tribes and the communities. But I think what was said earlier is that what you need in order to get the technology there is there have to be assessments, and it has to be done almost community by community, because there is no one size fits all. You know, if you're in a community with a lot of trees, wireless isn't going to help you much. You know, if you're out in the desert, wireless is great. You know, some places satellite is the only solution, and it's not a great solution. I live out in a rural community where we don't have fiber. We have trees. Wireless isn't good. I've had satellites. We've done the whole thing. So, but before you can have a plan, you have to have an assessment. And so each of these communities really needs an assessment, and there has to be funding that will go toward those individual assessments, because there is no one plan for the type of technology, and then also whatever the business plan is, it's going to help make that functional as well. We know that every tribal community, every IHS hospital health system in the country has the broadband, but it's the community that needs the access. And as well with our radio stations, not all of them, most of them now have broadband, but maybe the people who listen to them are not able to stream or participate to any kind of online survey. So it's really, you know, the first steps has to be assessment, and there needs to be money toward those assessments as well.
Jeffrey,
I wanted to add a few things there. I'd like to say something about. I referenced earlier a conversation that my brother and I had about growing up, and we were. This wasn't long ago when I told him about was explaining some of the work that we do. My brother also works for Chickasaw Nation Industries in our development area, and we have a diversity program at Chickasaw Nation Industries that's designed to help us develop business with those outside of ourselves at the Chickasaw Nation. It's predicated on the opportunity to contract with the federal government, and in assessments that we did about how to build business with other tribes and other communities, Hispanic, African American, other communities, we had a conversation about where we've been in the United States. What Hispanic communities have we been to? And this was in our entire development team. And then we turned around and came to the discussion, well, how many reservations have we visited? And at that point in time, my brother guesstimated that he'd been to about 70 reservations of the 310, and I guesstimate that I've been to about 100. So let me tell you what I've learned, being one of those guys walking around the plaza, stretching my neck, trying to find my own personal experience, because I think that it's fairly common. The telephone service that we have in Indian Country, 30%, almost 1 in 3 of our families in Indian Country does not have a telephone. It's where you'd expect it. It's where the economics has built out, major highways, large communities on the edge of reservations. Broadband, multiply that. Commissioner Tristani asked, how do we begin to deal with that? Well, the first is recognize what hasn't worked and what has worked, and don't get lost for, what do they say, don't get lost, don't lose the forest for the trees, but there is it's an overwhelming number, and that's an anecdotal number. That's a number that, when there are occasionally times where tribal leaders will call and will say, you make sure and get over there and tell them that 30% just means that, they think that we've increased the telephone service from, 59% to 70%. They think that's a great accomplishment. We'll tell them we're no longer 20 times less likely to have a phone, but only 12 times less likely to have a phone now. So the reality is, in my experience, and I can tell you what happened last week. I'm quite fortunate to have been appointed to the business board of the Acoma Pueblo. It is a beautiful place and restores your soul if you go there. That is about an hour due west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I've met the governors and the council members that I did not know, of course, in the tribal government buildings. I'm getting to meet more and more teenagers from the community, because the only place we have Wi-Fi on the reservation is actually in the hotel lobby. So I'll get up in the morning of the meeting and I'll come through, and there'll be these kids laid out with their books in the hotel lobby, and they'll look at me and I'll look at them and say, what are y'all doing? So we're doing our geometry homework. I said, cool, all right. They come there, they share a laptop or two. So it's very much where you would expect it if you had an opportunity to step out of your daily life and think about what's going on. One fundamental thing we must do to be able to change the course of the development of broadband, and one of the things I'm really excited about this study is we have to make the decision that now will be a change in direction. That the economic models, the decisions that our elected leaders, our appointed leaders, our governmental officials, our tribal leaders, our business leaders, our captains of industry, and the developmentalists out there, what has worked in certain places over the last 70 years isn't going to work now. So whatever happens in this broadband plan, and we're committed to spending our times and late nights helping and working, we need to signal a new direction. As Congress in the future looks to the reauthorization of key institutions that have been central to public communications in this country, we need to recognize that we're a new world economy. We have to look to goals in that new world economy. And you've got some of the best example of folks who have done that ahead of the curve in this study. So we don't have the answers. We try not to get tied up for the trees in the field, but it's got to be different. We have to make the commitment. There are many tribes, there are many who in this community who go to agencies with their concerns and their gripes, and goodness knows you heard those and others have heard them and hear them now in service. Well, we have to be committed among ourselves as tribes to go not with just those gripes, but also the solutions. And we have to go to folks where there are institutions. There's a groundbreaking meeting just a little while ago at the White House, and this is a new opportunity for fundamentally changing that direction. So that idea, we must, if we all leave here with that understanding, then this meeting has been an even greater success.
So we have time for one, maybe two more questions in the back here, and then we'll go over here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Clara Pratt. I'm from the Small Business Administration. Lovely to see you all again. First of all, thank you to Native Public Media for putting this groundbreaking study out in the public domain. I think it's very important. I'm also from the Navajo Nation, so very, very close to where Loris is from, and the only hotspot is the chapter house. And I just had a two-part statement to say. One was the fact that, you know, if I go home and all the kids doing their homework, they're actually sitting in pickup trucks around the chapter houses because they usually close at 4 or 5. So they're sitting in trucks, and it's often very cold. And then I went up to Alaska, and I would do a disservice not to mention that in Lower Kalskag, the school closes at 6. There are no cars because they use snowmobiles. So you have children sitting outside of the school, and at that point it was 5 degrees, with their laptops to do their homework. And so I think that there's a desire and a need to have this accessibility. So when we're talking about accessibility, it's also time, the time that it's available for a lot of these younger people. But I just wanted to ask questions. How can the Small Business Administration, through its entrepreneurial development services, assist in increasing accessibility to broadband in Indian country?
Oh, that's a great question.
Welcome. I'll bet you have an answer, Laura.
All right. We should talk, because I see a wonderful opportunity tied directly from small business, of which the communications highway in Indian country is a part. We're a major employer of our own Native people. And there are so many things we could work on. Investment into our workforce in terms of digital literacy, that bundle of literacy skills that could make our people more employable in this multimedia environment that we have now. There could be investments into other areas. Cottage industries that help to serve the communications highway, the engineers that we need, this new changing dynamic. I mean, there's just all sorts of possibilities. Absolutely. Leave your card behind. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Could I just follow up on that question, too? Because a couple of times the image of high school students and, you know, surrounding the chapter house or the hotel lobby to do homework. I just want to make the point, it's more than just, it's as important as the homework thing is, it's much more central than that. And in our work at CPB in supporting education, we're finding more and more the frontiers of education are moving to, the classroom is becoming less important and online vehicles are becoming more important. We have several $1 million in grants out now in different projects to create educational games, to create online repositories of educational content that students must be connected to access, and there's going to be more and more of this, not less and less. So unless students have ready access, and the gaming technology is less now about a student playing a game and learning from the game. It's more about the games are now interactive, leveraging platform, kind of Facebook, social networking kinds of technologies. Interconnection and digital technology is becoming more and more important to a successful education experience. And if we don't provide more capacity in Native America, we're going to again have a situation where Native Americans don't have access to the educational tools that the rest of America has.
And I can speak to that directly. I teach on the side at Eastern Oklahoma University. It's in the Chickasaw Nation. And I teach digitally. I live in Phoenix, they're in Oklahoma, and I often have students, emailing, or even, the department email me, say, okay, they've been down, there's been storms, the internet's down, It does create problems right now, but people want the classes. They want it that way. That is the model that it's going towards.
Yes.
Clara, I would add, I believe that the Small Business Administration can have a large role in helping define how the implications here impact tribal economies. Up until now, so much of the dialogue has been around the critical infrastructure and the need for critical infrastructure, and the economic dialogue is around creating the economic modeling for that. That's closely tied to how you one surmises that's closely tied to how you create an economy at home that can be viable for individual Indian entrepreneurs, not just tribal institutions of tribal government. When we're looking for the economic model to be able to replace a backbone that was built out directly to the reservation but then stopped, we're trying to aggregate all that demand. SBA could play a central role in helping identify those additional needs and bringing those to the table. Look forward to following up. Absolutely.
And our final question, please keep it brief. So.
My name is Paul Bessio. Just to add to what's been said, I think the SBA can help in terms of getting startups going, people that want to develop web services, people that want to develop iPhone apps, people that want to develop other types of software that when lands get connected, then it can really build out. And also just to add on the case studies, if you find that you can focus on particular bloggers or people that have really utilized the new technology to share social media stuff, things that have happened because of the connectivity. If you focus on that and highlight certain pieces, I think it really drives the argument even further, because you see people that are in the community who are acting, bringing people together, and so.
Did you have a question also for the panel?
It was really just a comment, and just to add an idea for the SBA and how they could contribute.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I wanted to thank our panelists for coming here today, for all the hard work that you guys have put in, to the rest of the teams who have been laboring behind the scenes to make this all such a rip-roaring success. I love this notion that, I guess Clara, is that your name, brought up, of the groundbreaking study. I think it very much is, and hopefully will shift debate dramatically here in Washington, D.C. So thank you all.